Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm Joe Payne. Welcome to another installment of Political Payne. I've been on a bit of a hiatus. I've been in school, earning my bachelor's, and I'm now in grad school studying history at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Where have you been? I've been studying a very interesting flashpoint in California history, and I have a wonderful guest here today to discuss it with me. This is a pre-recorded interview with my guest, Alan Salazar. He is a Chumash-Tataviam storyteller and educator. Just want to say hello and welcome Alan Salazar to Political Payne. How are you doing today, sir? Happy New Year. It's the first of 2025.
Yes, Happy New Year. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And glad to have you here. And I saw you speak. I was already aware of you, actually, but I saw you speak at the Chumash Museum in Thousand Oaks. And you were talking about the Chumash uprising, insurrection, rebellion, revolt, war, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
of 1824. And it was a really illuminating talk. I'm definitely citing it in the thesis I'm working on. But before we get to that, why don't you just tell my audience or whoever's watching out there in perpetuity in internet land, um, your story, your backstory, where you came from, and maybe a bit about how you discovered that as a young person.
Yeah, I was born in San Fernando, California, and that's where my Chumash-Tataviam Tongva ancestors are from. So on my father's side of the family, my ancestors were taken to the San Fernando Mission starting in 1799. Um, and for several generations, uh, my tribal ancestors helped build and were part of the slave labor workforce at the San Fernando Mission. My mom is from Hanford, California, and is mostly Portuguese and English. And we actually moved there when I was 2 years old. So I grew up out in the country, riding horses, chasing chickens with Tiny, the world's greatest dog. Um, uh, Moved to Bakersfield, lived there as a teenager, grew up as a young man there, started a family. Um, and then in 1995, I was divorced and uh, trying to decide where I wanted to live and moved to Ventura, where I'm currently at. Moved to Ventura because it's more in my traditional tribal territory, part of the Shumash lands. And I always enjoyed visiting Ventura, and I've been active ever since I moved here in '95 with my tribal culture. Uh, my family, I think, is a little unique um, in that I've kind of done things in reverse of what a lot of tribal people do. So my father was a Marine, fought in World War II, and he raised all of us, my brothers and sisters, to be proud of our Indian tribal ancestry. So I never wondered or heard family stories that we might be this or might be that. I grew up as an Indian, and that's how I've always identified. And what I mean by I've done it in reverse, when the pandemic hit, I decided to start doing a little more research on my English and Portuguese ancestry. Uh, and Like many of those blue eyed Cherokee people, that their great grandmother was full blooded Cherokee and was an Indian princess, my English ancestors come from royalty. Two of my great grandfathers were the mayor of Bath, England in the 1650s. So I think my English title will be the Earl of Grey.
That's a good tea. And so you talked about what did you say? Like coming to it backwards. How is that? Um, different from other folks and then how is that kind of what did you go through, what did you see as a young person, what that meant to be growing up Indian in California?
Yeah, well, it's real easy for many Southern California tribal people because many of us have Spanish surnames because of that mission period. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, families, tribal families in the late 1700s, early 1800s, uh, uh, married into Spanish and Mexican families, some by force. So we have Spanish surnames: Salazar, Ortega, uh, Ortiz, Garcia. Those are just some of the tribal names in my tribe that the video I've had initiative with. So it's real easy to put in perspective and culture. For dominant culture, the safety of others. But I said my father was a Marine, and got in his fair share of fights and stations because he wasn't going to try and hide his tribal heritage. There's a picture that I show in a lot of my talks. It's a picture taken in 1957. Me and my older brother wanted to get Mohawk haircuts because we thought those were Indian because the Indian had.
Um, Alan, I hate to interrupt. I'm
Sure.
having difficulty hearing you. Oh, you're coming in clear, and then it's cutting out a bit. I don't know if you could reposition your headphones or
Okay.
plug it in and out really quick
How,
and speak
how,
up.
how's that?
That's much better. I don't know what you did, but you did it.
Okay. I'm
So
just
go ahead
holding
and
it closer to me. Where do you want
sorry,
me
go
to
ahead and
start?
speak on that again. Yeah, just what you just said. Please speak
Okay.
on that and growing up in California.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a, a famous picture in my family of me, my older brother, and my pop. It was taken in 1957 in Hanford, California, and me and my older brother wanted to get Mohawk haircuts because we thought those were the meanest, baddest Indians that we saw on television, were the Indians with Mohawk haircuts. And
Yeah.
I got one. My older brother got one. My pop got in the barber's chair, and he got a Mohawk haircut. Now, let me put this into perspective. We lived in Hanford, California, where my mom is from, a Portuguese dairy farming community. My mother and father in the 1950s were one of the few interracial couples. Everybody knew who we were in Hanford, California.
Wow.
Everybody knew we were Indians, and we were proud of it. And like we had to bail Pop out of jail a few times on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, where he got in a fight with someone who didn't like Indians and would make some derogatory statement, and the fight was on. And that's how I was raised. I was raised to be proud of my tribal heritage, and I've been an activist ever since I got that Mohawk haircut in 1957 when I was 6 years old. And I've always been involved as an adult with various Native organizations. When I lived in Bakersfield, I was on the American Indian Health Council. Um, Started a Native group in the early 1990s in Bakersfield to protect sites and ancient village sites and things like that, burial sites. And I've been involved actively to do as much as I can to save, preserve, and revitalize my tribal cultures. So it's something I've done for probably uh, uh, over 60 years of my life, and I'm 73 years old.
Wow. Do you want to speak on really quick the work you did with the Chumash Maritime and the TOML, that construction and piloting that you were involved in?
Yeah, it's been one of the uh, probably best things I've been involved with tribally in my life. In 1997, the local Chumash community in Ventura, Santa Barbara, Santa Ynez was offered an opportunity to help build a traditional working tamal, a traditional Chumash plank canoe. And at that time in 1997, there were no working tamals. There were some that had been built and were on display in museums. And we were promised by the NOAA, uh, who helped fund the project, the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, and the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, that also helped to consult and advise on it, that this would be a tamal canoe for the Chumash community to use. And we've used it for 15, 20 years. It's still a working tamal. We haven't used it very much in the last few years. The last 12, 15 years, we've paddled mostly in the San Ynez Tamal, Muktamai. But since 1997, we've been building and trying to revitalize our canoe culture and have made great strides. There are several Tamals now, and we're starting uh, uh, to build another Tamal here in Ventura, and we'll start in earnest. We're working on the jig, and probably next month we'll start building. I'm not sure what number this one is, but somewhere around probably we have 6 or 7 Tamals out there now playing canoes. So
Very cool. So you as a modern man looking back, a modern California Indian, and Chumash, what does the Tomal, what do you feel? How do you see it? But also, what do you think the Tomal represents and represented to the Chumash people across all their 1,000 years of living in this area of California?
yeah, well, it was one of the things that made the Chumash unique, Tongva, and made them unique. Those two tribes built plank canoes, flat bottom canoes that carry a lot of weight. So it allowed us to go out to our islands off our coast, uh, to use the canoes as transports to take people back and forth, to also take out 3, 4, 500 pounds of trade items. For example, there were traditionally no deer on our islands, the Chumash Islands, Santa Capa, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, San Miguel. So to take out deer hides, deer meat, and things like that to our island family and friends, uh, that's what the canoes allowed us to do. It gave us a power, a freedom, a connection to the ocean that tribes in California didn't have. So they're a large part of the Chumash culture.
Very good, and we also know that they're a part of the kind of patterns of resistance that happen during 1824. Let's start talking about that. This is the focus of my studies in grad school, but it was also the subject of the talk you gave
Mm.
in Thousand Oaks in 1824. The Chumash in Mission San Ynez, Santa Barbara, and La Purísima staged the largest armed uprising against the California missions. Um, when do you remember first learning about this? Was this something that Chumash people always understood and always discussed, or is this something, as you did you have any period of rediscovering this history, or is this something that I remember I reported on this as a newspaper writer years ago, and a buddy of mine who is Chumash, told me, well, we knew about it. You all sat there in school, and we sat there hearing you all not learn about it, but we knew about it. So I'm wondering what your experience was learning about 1824, and then what did you think about it, and we can go into the more you've learned and how you think about it.
Yeah, well, the 1824 Chumash revolt is very complex. It's something that there's probably several theses just in that one story. And when you take a deep dive into it, like I said, there's a lot of complex issues. Uh, and on the issue of how much did have the Chumash passed down that knowledge, that history of the 1824 revolt. Uh, and this is just my opinion. Uh, Within my family, my father and my grandparents, Manuel and Vera Salazar, Vera Ortega Salazar, my grandmother, uh, they didn't talk much uh, about tribal history and tribal traditions. My grandmother a little bit on the plants and medicine, uh, but when you look at my father's generation, my grandparents' generation, they survived uh, the Great Depression, World War One, World War Two, uh, and they were the smallest minority in California, and so they were in survival mode. They worked hard. My father was working as a young boy because of the Depression. My father was born in 1924. By the early 1930s, he was shining shoes and doing whatever he could to bring in a few pennies, literally a few pennies, to the family. Uh, so we didn't we didn't do winter solstice ceremony. We didn't have that luxury. They were just trying to put a roof over their head and food on the table. So when you look at California tribal history throughout all of California, at best, 3 generations, probably 2 generations. That's what we know of 13 to 15,000 years of tribal history coming from. Those generations that were born in the mid 1800s, some maybe early 1800s that lived long lives, 95 years old, that knew the traditional ways. That generation that was born in the late 1800s, that their parents had told them and taught them the old traditional ways. So 2 generations, 3 generations, trying to preserve and pass on tribal knowledge that had been around for over 10,000 years. So, I didn't grow up knowing this 1824 revolt. It's something that I learned about later in life and had to research. And it's one of the difficulties of being an urban Indian. So, other than the Sandy Inez Chumash, the rest of us Chumash people, the Tataviam, the Tongva, uh, uh, we're federally done recognized. We're urban Indians. So we didn't have the luxury of having an elders council in the 1800s, in the 1900s, in the 1950s. So it's a real struggle to hold on to your tribal history and your tribal knowledge when your land is stolen, your culture is stolen. It's really difficult.
Yeah. Now, I would be remiss if we didn't take just at least a moment to recognize and sit with the mission system and what the mission system really was, how it operated. So already in this conversation, you've said that your ancestors were enslaved there. Um, that's in historiography. Historians argue whether or not what was done to Native people of California was it technically slavery? It wasn't chattel slavery. There's the idea that also that we read historians like the Indigenous activist Edward Castillo and others who just say, look, these things are functionally genocidal. They might not have been rounding us up and slaughtering us like the Americans would in 1850 and on. But these were functionally genocidal. They were concentrating us, in one area and in these areas while we're being debilitated by disease. David Hackle talks about the disruption of indigenous food resources like acorns by all the goats and cows that roam the fields and chew them up. Um, how do you understand the missions? What do they represent? Someone who's a scholar and approaches it from that vantage point and just the kind of scholarship I pay attention to. They were functionally genocidal, feudal institutions, settler colonial institutions that were insanely brutal, massive social control, very authoritarian, carceral. You know what I mean? They were like the first mass prison system, and possibly, and they're backed by military force, by the presidios and the military, of course. What, like, how do you see it, and then how does this reverberate into where we are today, and this kind of legacy? Like you said, you're the only Chumash who have a nation are San Ynez, and I believe that the only people who are a member of that nation can track their ancestors to the mission rolls of San Ynez, right? So you have a big majority of Chumash who aren't even recognized. How does that fall into this? But I'll let you go from there.
There's several important issues when we talk about the missions. Uh, One, that simple theory that uh, uh, the winners write the history, and, and I'll just use what the missions say about themselves, what the Catholic Church says about the missions, and what the Catholic Church says about itself. We're in 2025, and just in the last few years, the Pope still talking about cover-ups, that priests need to be held accountable for child molestation. That's what the current Pope is saying. That means for over 200 years, all those other popes, they didn't talk about it. They were part of the cover-up. If they're covering that up, what else are they covering up? Are they going to admit to the treatment that happened to tribal people at the missions in California and throughout all of America? It was horrendous. And like I said, I'll just use their numbers. So this isn't stuff that I'm making up. You can go to the San Fernando Mission website right now, and this is what it'll say, that in 1810, the San Fernando Mission was at its peak. There were 1,000 Indians there living at the mission. Now, some of them were very old and feeble. Some of them were just small babies and very young children. So of that 1,000, maybe a workforce of 800 at best, probably not even that much. But those 800 people or so had to tend and take care of 13,000 head of cattle, free range, like you were saying. They weren't fenced in. They went wherever they want. They ate all the native grasses, all the acorns, all the things that our traditional animals that we hunted ate. So the populations, the deer population, the antelope population, the Thule elk population, all the small animals, the rabbits, the squirrels, they all suffered. The diseases that the Spanish brought that affected my ancestors affected all the animals. So it didn't just affect us, it affected all the animals, all the wild animals that used to be in abundance. They hunted all the large predators because those large predators hunt cattle and sheep. Uh, so they suffered. So not only did the tribal people suffer, the mountain lions, the wolves, the bears, they suffered tremendously. The deer population, all the way down to the small animals, they were all affected by those diseases and and that production. Then you throw in what did it do to the native plants? Where the San Fernando Mission is built, there were hundreds of native plants just in those few acres right there, those 30, 40 acres. They cut down oak trees to build their mission. They cut down oak trees to build their roads and trails to connect all of the missions throughout California. So our native plants, our native animals, our native people, those three all suffered because of 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 the mission period. And the Padres today, they want to discuss and debate how good Father Sarah was and that he tried to protect us. Yeah, I could care less about Father Sarah uh, uh, because Father Sarah had one strong principle that the indigenous people of California were inferior. Their culture was inferior. So look at the world we live in today. Whenever we try to paint someone as inferior, that's justifying us doing whatever we want to them. So when I ask third graders, my ancestors worked at the San Fernando Mission. They were never paid. What were they? And third graders, without any hesitation, go, they were slaves. Yet the Catholic Mission will not admit that today in 2025. They're just barely admitting that the priests are child molesters. So, take what you want from what the Catholic Church is trying to say, how they didn't enslave us, that Father Sarah tried to protect us. Um, uh, but Father Sarah and all the padres, all the soldiers, believed that we were inferior. And let me put this in today's perspective. I'm 73 years old. If this was 1824, 1825, and I was living at the San Fernando Mission, the Padres would say, "Oh, you know, Alan, you have the intelligence of about a 4 or 5 year old." And that's how they would treat anything I would say. Oh, he's a savage. He's inferior. Why would they do that? So they could justify not paying us, so they can justify beating us, so they can justify forcing us to become Catholics. So uh, uh, just go to any website, and I'll give you one final example. Another example of what was the impetus for the 1824 revolt. Every mission in California, every mission in California has a mass burial site, and only one mission has put up a sign stating who those people are. The Ventura mission has 3,000 Chumash people buried under a building and parking lot where kids go to school and play on. And not one of those 3,000 people are their names acknowledged. And the Ventura Catholic Church, the Ventura Mission, has all of those people's names that are buried in this mass burial. The San Fernando Mission, where my ancestors are from, have over 2,400 people in a mass burial in the Bob Hope Memorial Garden. That's a shame. And I
Jeez.
and I think even in the Catholic religion, they are committing a sin by covering this up, by lying about it. I'm pretty sure I went to mass my whole childhood, uh, and I openly admit I didn't pay attention very well. But I'm pretty sure that lying is a sin, and they're lying about uh, how they treated us, uh, how there's mass burials, and they're not even acknowledging those people.
And this was standard operating practice. Like the death was so widespread. I mean, I don't think as modern people we can quite grasp. Here's a from a local paper here of ground penetrating radar work that was done at Mission San Ynez, which was the epicenter of the beginning of the 1824 uprising. And I don't think a lot of modern people can really sit with what it means for multiple funerals every day. You know, funerals every day.
Yes,
Children, parents, uncles, whatever, friends, adults, elderly, middle aged, babies, every day. Um, what what do you think can be done to? I mean, part of why my work I try to focus on this because in California we're very much sold a romanticized view of the missions. You know, missions just kind of fall into the backdrop of our state. Um, you know, downtown areas of cities will ask the, developers to craft their buildings in the mission or the Spanish style. Um, Spanish tile first came to Mission San Luis Obispo. That was the first place it came. They used Spanish tile in Alta California, and that was because the Chumash there set the thatched roof on fire. So the missions have there's a what I try to focus on in my scholarship is the counter revolution. Like they're the missions were constantly in danger of uprising. You have in the 1780s, Mission San Diego is attacked, and they brutally killed Father Jaime, who was there. And this was constant. But even if it wasn't a mass uprising such as the Chumash did, 1824 is remarkable because it was so large. It spanned three missions. more than 1,000 people fled inland in like a refugee population type of situation, hundreds of which were never returned either, or but you have this counter revolution that follows. I'm also interested in what you think about how 1824 falls, 14 years after the first outbreak of independence in Mexico, the first Mexican Revolution. Then we have this local monarchy, the Iturbide monarchy, and in the year 1824, I'm going through all these documents. The missions are um, receiving letters saying you need to swear an oath because we've just reformed the secular Republic of Mexico. So they are, the political structure of Mexico is going through revolution and counter revolution and back and forth. We're smack dab in the age of revolutions, not, and it's interesting because even in the sources you see there are priests and soldiers complaining about the new constitution and what it means, and that it's emboldening people. So, like, what do you think about the politics of it? Because this is only 200 years ago. We're speaking on the first of 2025, and this happened in 1824. I meant to talk to you last year so we could hit the 200-year anniversary. I don't think it's that important, but what do like you said, it's complex, but there are it's like a layer cake. There are lots of layers we could look at it from.
Um, well, like I said, once again, I'll use those third graders. I have spoken to thousands and thousands of third graders, uh, and I'll ask third graders, uh, you know, even though we grew all the food, uh, all the corn, all the flour, all the fruits and vegetables, uh, uh, when you look at the structure of the missions, the Padres were the spiritual leaders, uh, 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 were the military leaders, and were there to maintain the safety for the Padres, not for us. So I would ask third graders, uh, when all that food was gathered and harvested, when the cows were slaughtered and butchered, uh, who got fed first? The Padres or the Indians? The kids go to the Padres. Who got fed first? The soldiers or the Indians? The soldiers. Who got the most food? The Padres and the soldiers or the Indians? The Padres and the soldiers. If someone was sick, who would the doctor see first? The Padres and the soldiers. Third graders know this. So why is the Catholic Church still denying this? So I tell people the 1824 revolt, we believe one of the main uh, ignitions that set off that revolt, started that fire, uh, was the beating of a young boy. That he was beaten so severely for whatever he did, that he was close to death. And you don't get beaten because you complained that there wasn't any cinnamon to put on your pancakes. Uh, uh, you don't get beaten because uh, you complained that you didn't get two 15-minute breaks along with your lunch hour. Uh, you get beaten and you revolt because of those beatings, uh, because of, of extremely poor treatment. We were not a warlike culture. Did we have battles and disputes 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago? Yes. But for the most part, we were business people. We traded extensively and had very elaborate trade routes throughout all of California and going into Arizona and New Mexico. So we were more entrepreneurial, more diplomatic. And for us to say, kind of pull a Popeye, enough is enough, I can't take no more, uh, uh, against a force that we knew was going to defeat us, that we knew we would probably lose in the end. Those couple hundred men that were involved in that revolt, they knew that the Spanish were going to send more soldiers with more weapons and cannons, and they did. And they knew that they were either going to have to run and hide and never come back out of hiding, or they were going to be hung uh, for treason, and they were. It was one of the last times we used our canoes traditionally, because some of the men went out in their tumults and hid out on Lamu until the Padres calmed everything down and realizing, oh wait, we can't kill all of them because that's our labor force. So their motivations, in my humble opinion, when the Padres negotiated peace, was not because they loved us. It's because we were the labor. We were their slaves. We were the free labor. So hey,
Yep.
let's calm down. Let's not kill all of them. We'll hang a few. We'll send a few to prison. Those that escape back in the mountains, they can stay back there in the San Joaquin Valley, up by Fort Tejon and San Sebastian Indian Reservation. Uh, 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 which, by the way, here's another example of how what happened to California Indians. The San Sebastian Indian Reservation was one of the largest Indian reservations in all of America. And the Indian agent, General Beale, and his uh, 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 compadre, Mr. Kern, uh, decided, there's only about 300 Indians living on this reservation. They don't need 50,000 acres. Let's take 25,000 of it for ourselves. And they took 25,000 acres for themselves. And then a few years later, they go, there's only 300 Indians. They don't need 25,000 acres. 10,000 is more than enough. And they took that other 15,000 and gave it to various influential politicians and wealthy early settlers in the Bakersfield, Kern County area. And then somehow the Tejon Ranch was established, and they say they bought the final 10,000 acres from those 200 or 300 Indians. Uh, and that was taken to court, and there just wasn't enough evidence to prove that the Tejon Ranch just took that land. But regardless, a 50,000 acre reservation was gone. And that happened throughout all of California. It happened to my family. Land was taken from us. Either they assessed taxes and fees. So, like I said, you don't revolt against an army that you know is going to kill you unless you are treated very poorly. That you just go, I've had enough. We can't take this poor quality of food, working all day, our kids dying. When you look at the mission system, it's pretty simple. You don't have to be an anthropologist. You don't have to have a PhD to figure out that if at age 10 you're forced to work all day, at age 10 you're forced to be an adult, that what's going to happen is the young people, the 10-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, they're going to die at a higher rate because they're getting such poor treatment. No medical needs were taken care of. The food was very poor quality, and they're very old. So you lose two big demographics of what you need to survive. We need the young people to survive. We need the elders to survive, and they were wiped out at a much higher rate than any group. So there's part of why our canoe culture almost went extinct, because our young people were dying at a high rate and our older people were dying at such a high rate. Traditionally, those older people would be teaching those 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds how to build our canoes, how to paddle in them, how to navigate in them. And the old people were dying and the young people were dying. And that middle group, they were the slave laborers. So they were just trying to survive and not get chicken pox and die, not trying to get the flu. We have flu epidemics now, and a few people die, and it's big news. It's on CNN. Thousands of California Indians died from the flu
Yeah,
because their immune systems were weakened due to the poor treatment. And that's what started the 1824 revolt. The poor treatment was so severe. It wasn't, we didn't get our afternoon coffee break. No, 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 no. It was because of extremely brutal treatment, beatings, poor quality of food, little kids having to work like they're adults. Uh,
constant assault from the soldiers.
yes, you know. So uh,
Yeah,
uh, uh, you can believe that the Catholic Church version of 1769 to 1848, or you can use common sense. Those of you that
yeah.
are not of California Indian heritage or are listening to this, use your common sense and let me know what you come up with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because uh, the archives of the missions, the mission document archives, are still maintained by the missions. Mission Santa Barbara never left the control of the Franciscans. La Purísima is a state historic park that's that the state restored, and it's very much like a Disneyland experience of the mission grounds. It was completely reconstructed. It was a rubble heap before the Work Projects Administration, but Santa Barbara is a cushy place. Why wouldn't you want to study there? And Mission Santa Barbara has a college. Franciscans have maintained colleges since before the missionization of California, and this is just one of those colleges. So accessing the archive is a whole thing. But I believe you have to be careful when you use an archive because it completely silences the Chumash and the indigenous people. But there's a lot you can extract out of it, and you use the archive against them, so to speak. But just to talk about what the labor, I think it's and as someone who with some radical tendencies, I think the labor is a huge part of it because. Um, you can just see it. You can see it all throughout the, all those ledger books of how many heads of cattle, how many heads of sheep, how many bushels of wheat, how much wine are they producing, how much, the back and forth bickerings between padres about who can spare beef tallow, the literal grease in the wheels of this settler colonial system, and hides, leather hides. De la Guerra, the head of the Presidio, is complaining to La Purísima before the revolt, like, "I need those shoes. You need to make me more shoes. None of my soldiers have shoes. Get everybody to work on those." But I think I found one source that during the revolt, I believe this is a Franciscan to speaking to a soldier. So the Franciscans and the soldiers were kind of at odds. These are Spanish peninsulares, people from the Franciscans, and this new secular state of Mexico. And the soldiers are more likely people who are actually born uh, uh, here in Alta California or Mexico and made it to there. Um, but so they lost my train of thought there a little bit. But there's a Franciscan speaking to a Mexican military, and he just says straight up, "You and I both know there wouldn't be a Spaniard nor a Mexican who would eat in all of California if it weren't for the labor of the Indian." And then to even go farther, I actually have one of the documents here, but this was a soldier named Pardo who was writing to De la Guerra during the conflict. And he's from Mission San Ynez. This is the kind of stuff you get to try to read when you do this kind of thing. But he is complaining straight up, saying that the Chumash, the Indians, took all the horses. The horses are in possession of the Indians. It's actually a title of a chapter in Elizabeth Haas's book that goes over this. But he says the horses are all in possession of the Indians, and he literally goes on to complain and say, this soldier, I have no expertise. I can't rope these horses. I don't know how to corral the horses that have gotten away, and they're all the best riders. They're the horsemen, not me. I got holes in my shoes, you know. So even this settler colonial military is completely reliant on every level on the labor of the indigenous Californians. And what I find fascinating about 1824 is you have the Chumash um, really use this whole suite of skills, their ancestral knowledge, the new knowledge that they've accrued on the missions. There were even some who were trained with guns when
Mhm.
the Portuguese Bouchard was coming through. You know, the Franciscans trained them a bit in basic militia stuff to protect them from kind of a pirate situation. So that they understood militancy, they understood what a junta was, and they also, some of the things they did during the revolution tell me that they're like political. You know what I mean? They make, like, you call them whoa. There goes my camera, but you can. I'll let you respond. But they're talking about um, the things in spiritual terms, political terms, labor terms. How do you see that? And the militancy is really fascinating as well. But go ahead.
Well, and I think I touched on this a little bit, uh, like I said, when numbers, but you have to take a little bit deeper dive. As you were saying, we did and made everything. So when we built the missions, we 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 shaped all those boards by hand, uh, to make the door frames, to make the doors. Every nail that was used to hammer that door and door frame together, we made every nail. We were the blacksmiths. We made every horseshoe. We made every nail to go into those horseshoes to shoe all the horses. Every every mission had more than 2,000 head of horses. Anyone that's had horses know they're a lot of work. So when you start adding up all that work, making all the clothes, cooking all the food, growing all the food, um, I mean, it's a lot to, making wool from the sheep's wool, to make clothes. It's labor intensive. But let me be clear on one thing here. This is the most important thing I'm going to say today. California, like America, is one of the the greatest natural resources anywhere on the world. As we know, California has the fifth largest economy in the world. We grow more food in the San Joaquin Valley than anywhere else in the United States. We feed America. Anyone out there that's an entrepreneur or knows anything about how capitalism works knows that if you're starting a business where you have a lot of resources, that business has a really good chance of succeeding. And if you can start a business today, a little coffee shop, and you get free labor for the first 100 years, that business is going to succeed. So let me be very clear. We were free labor from 1769 to 1873 and maybe even beyond. So more than 100 years. Became a state, it passed the California Indian Protection Act that didn't protect us. It allowed California citizens to take any Indian that looked like they were indigent, homeless, and force them to live and work for them as an apprentice for free, 10, 15 to 20 years. It allowed them to take Indian children from their families and keep those kids until they were 18 years old. As they didn't use the word slave, but basically call it whatever you want: indentured servantry, slavery, free labor in an area where the natural resources are, are so abundant that even if you had to pay your labor force, you are going to succeed. So, California, the fifth largest economy in the world, was built on Native American tribal free labor. We built California, and most of us have not been compensated for it. All I have ever gotten from the Bureau of Indian Affairs as a fairly non recognized tribe is $650 in the early 1970s, where they gave us 47 cents an acre for our land. That's how many millions of acres of land was taken and stolen from California tribal people. So, like I said, I think it's the most important thing I've said today. California was built by California Indians, and we haven't been appreciated or even compensated up until 2025. I hope in my lifetime I see some remediation, some repayment for what California Indians have done for the state of California. We built it.
Absolutely. Um, what do you think? The Biden administration recently granted a maritime sanctuary um, to the Chumash Maritime Sanctuary. What do you think about that? You know what? It definitely is. I mean, I don't want to color any emotion to it, or get too political about the Biden administration. But it is interesting at this time where land back has become kind of a organizing something to organize around. That all this land would be granted back, and of course, it's all land that's underwater. But considering the Chumash's relationship with the ocean and the Pacific here along the central coast of California, what are your thoughts on this new sanctuary?
Um, the sanctuary is a great thing. It's just another example of the complexity of California uh, tribal history, whereas there were still non-native people that are claiming to be native involved with that sanctuary. And it took hours and hours and hundreds of emails and requests to NOAA to reach out to the true Northern Chumash. And it's a struggle to do what seems to be an obvious right, protect our coastline, protect our sea life, protect our ocean that all of us need to survive. Uh, uh, and yet there's those fake Indians out there taking credit for it. Is it a good thing? Yes. But the Yak Tichu, Talini, uh, uh, Northern Chumash tribe, they need to be recognized. They should be the lead on that project, along with Sandy Inez. Sandy Inez is the only federally recognized tribe, and NOAA had just in the last 2 years. Are we still here? Just in the last 2 years, has realized, oh wait, we have to reach out to Sandy Inez because they're the federally recognized Chumash tribe. Uh, so uh, they 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 started off on the wrong foot, and it's taken them a while to make some corrections, but they're moving in the right direction. And as I said earlier, there's three areas that are all connected: the plants, the animals, the people. And when I say the people, I mean the original people. All three of those are all connected. They have been since time immemorial, and they're still connected now. And we have to revitalize our native plants, our native animal population, and our native tribal population. It's the right thing to do. and it'll make us stronger as a state, and it'll make us stronger as a nation if we just do those three, help revitalize those three areas. Common sense.
Of course, and we've seen that recently also with the Klamath River
Yes.
and Klamath being given back to. I don't want to get the tribal name incorrect, but the folk up there have the river was undammed. It was put under their protection, and there's already salmon swimming upriver. It really is a. I don't want to get too heavy or overtly political. The show is political pain after all, but I tend to say we live in kind of a horrifying right wing tech dystopia. Whether you want to blame neoliberalism or blame capitalism, or neoliberal type capitalism, or whatever. But I don't know. There seems to be, when you're stuck in the cyber dome or whatever you want to call it, and you let that kind of dominate your view of the world and your outlook. Things can seem, like the doomerism it's called, right? Where
Yeah.
things are bad, they're only going to get worse. Why, and this is a fascinating thing to me is, just like you're talking about connecting with the land, protecting it, protecting the animals, and granting that power back to Indigenous people that they actually know quite well how to do this. But I also see intersections with the Chumash resistance in 1824, because you have the people who held Mission La Purísima and held it for all that time. But you also have the people who fled inland and lived in the two layers with the Yokut, and they were living off the land. And then you have the folks who got their tomols out from wherever they had them during the revolt, and to stay safe because they knew there was going to be a lot of violence and tumult. They paddled out to Santa Cruz Island or the Channel Islands to hide out during that. And I heard you in your talk. You talked about ancestral knowledge, indigenous knowledge, feeling your DNA light up as you paddled across the channel. What is the role of traditional lifeways and traditional knowledge, and how do we segue that into our seemingly world on fire as it is right now?
Um, you know, I say this all the time, and uh, it may be too simple, uh, but we're all tribal people. We all come from tribal cultures. So when I started researching my English and Portuguese ancestry, uh, my wife and I went over to England a couple summers ago, and my wife is an artist, and she makes all of her paints from ochres, soft chalk stones, the way tribal people all around the world, including the Chumash, did their rock art. And we went to this cave in England that was 4,500 years old. The cave is actually older than that. They've been mining ochres in this cave for 4,500 years. And there was a painting drawing in the gift shop part of this ochre cave, where they are still mining ochres today to make paint from. And there was a painting of what a village looked like in South England 4,500 years ago. It looked identical to a Chumash village. Willow, dome shaped, tule thatched huts, houses. My English ancestors lived almost an identical lifestyle to my Chumash ancestors, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles apart. So my recommendation and encouragement to everyone that's listening to this, to everyone, get in touch with your tribal roots. There's nothing wrong with worshiping the sun. That doesn't make you a savage. That makes you a person of the earth. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating the longest day of the year, the shortest day of the year, the fall equinox, the spring equinox, and and paying respect and making offerings. When you make a traditional tribal offering, most California tribal people, we use tobacco, and we offer tobacco back to Mother Earth to thank her. All you're doing is basically sending a prayer. It's no different than what Catholics do every Sunday at Mass. They pray. When we have our ceremonies and make offerings, we're saying our prayers and giving our thanks. I'm pretty sure I remember that from going to Mass as a young boy. Giving thanks is important. So I think if we get back to that as a culture, as a nation, being a little bit more respectful to the plants, the animals, and to each other, we'll be better off. It's a very simple idea, very difficult to do. Uh,
Yes.
we have a long way to go. I mean, we're the fifth largest economy in the world, and yet you and I will go to the store later today or within the next week, and everything in that store, throughout the whole store, there's plastic all over. Well, we know plastic harms the environment. Uh, get rid of plastic bags. We're the fifth largest economy. If we can't get rid of the plastic bags in the stores, that says something about our will. That says something about our focus. We're not focused. Our will is weak. Uh, let's be a little more respectful, and let's take those little small steps. Uh, Paper bags work really well. Do they may last as long as those thick plastic ones? No, but they don't do as much harm to the environment. Cloth bags. Uh, 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 so uh, I'll, I'll stop this soapbox. I'll get off my soapbox on protecting the environment the way tribal people have done it for thousands of years. And all of us are tribal people. I encourage all of you from Europe to get in touch with your tribal ancestry. Uh, you don't need to to train with a Lakota medicine man and then run a Lakota sweat in California. Get in touch with your English, Irish, Scottish, Viking, Italian, all those tribal ancestries. They were doing some good things back there 5,000 years ago. Let's revitalize them.
That's cool. And while that is a great wrap up, and I feel like we could end it there. I want to be selfish and ask you one more question for myself as somebody who's studying history and looking at this period of California history. I think 1824 is a great flashpoint to kind of rethink the missions and kind of force the conversation. Well, why would they, like you said, why would they revolt? It's not because they missed their coffee break. But I kind of asked you about this at your talk. Some very recent historians have tried to classify 1824 as a full scale war, that the Chumash essentially waged a revolutionary war. A revolt kind of uh, uh, elicits that, but classifying it as a war, I think it's mostly to recognize the scope of the conflict, the fact that the Chumash laid claim to mission La Parisme, said this is ours now. We will. This is our mission. I think one of the Padres says that they were told by the Chumash, we will make do with what God will provide and our own labor. Like we will do what we can with what God will provide, or basically standing on their own. And the idea that there were, the thousands who fled inland to Buena Vista with the Yokut, but not all of them were ever returned. So you do have the Chumash who truly were successful. Whether we don't know where they all ended up, if disease or whatever caught up with everybody. But there were hundreds who were never returned, and even interior California from 1824 until 10 years later, the mission's ending. Interior California was a multi-tribal coalition of resistance, raiding inland ranchos and whatnot. So I think you could almost look at 1824 as the beginning of the end of the mission system. That the Chumash forced this issue. What do you think? How as someone situated as you are, how do you think historians should approach this? Does it even matter to call it a war? Is that just what historians do, is fight over fancy words, or how do you view it? How do you think historians should approach this time in history, and engage with Chumash sources and what have you?
Um, well, I think the most important thing is not what word is used to describe March of 1824. Um, uh, what is important is just telling the story. We are a storyteller culture, and as a storyteller myself, I just want that story told. So right now in California, uh, third graders and fourth graders study California Indians. Third graders study California tribal history, and fourth graders study the mission period. And then after that, we're not taught again. Nothing about California tribal history is taught in middle school or high school. I could care less if you call it a revolution, a war, a revolt, uh, a misunderstanding. Remember, we're talking about a language that the word TOT and the word TAUGHT, taught, is both pronounced the same and spelled completely differently. So I could give a rat's ass what word you use to describe 1824. I just want the story told, and I want it told in history classes in our high schools as part of the curriculum, because I can't have a discussion with third graders about a boy that was brutally beaten. I can't have that discussion with a third grader. It's too traumatic. I can have that discussion with a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old. Teach the 1824 revolt, teach California tribal history at the high school level. By the time I remember in 2006, I believe, I went to 39 elementary schools in San Luis Obispo County. And the last school I went to was Paso Robles High School. And I asked those high school students questions that I asked third graders, questions that many of the third graders knew the answer to. And when I asked those high school students questions about the Chumash, how did they live? Where were their villages? What kind of canoes did they build? All I got was blank stares. They didn't know the answer to any of those questions. And I asked the teacher afterwards, and I spoke to 500 students at Paso Robles High School that day. And none of them knew the answers that third graders knew. And I asked the teacher, I go, did those students not know the answers, or were they teenagers and just didn't want to answer the question because it's not cool? He goes, no, they
Yeah,
didn't know the answers because your history is not taught anytime after the third grade. So
yeah,
I could care less what word, revolt, war, battle, skirmish, uh, uh, skirmish, that's a great word. Um,
it's a
but
fun word.
just tell the story, tell our whole story. Just teach
Yeah,
it the way it should be taught, not just at the third grade level, at the high school level also, and make it part of the official curriculum. I don't want some high school teacher to hear this and go, I'm going to teach that. Thank you. You're going to reach about 100 students maybe.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it needs the Department of Education in California, tell our story. Tell our story.
Very good. Very good. And really quick, Alan, you're also you have a book. You're a published author. Could we hype your book really quick for anybody watching?
Yes, and if you could type this into the little thing,
Sure.
all the W's, www.sunspritehandwork.com. So SUNSPRITEHANDWORK, handwork.com. And that's where the 4 books that my wife and I have done. She does all the art, the way tribal people have done art for thousands of years. I write the stories. Some of them are original stories written in the spirit of my Tataviam ancestors, and some of them are traditional Chumash stories that I have told for years and years. And 2025, we're gonna work on our book, and I'm leaning towards the true tribal story of P22, the mountain lion that lived in Griffith Park for 10 years and was the impetus for
Neat.
the largest wildlife bridge being built in California. And I
Oh,
want
wow.
to thank uh, Beth Pratt and Robert Rock and all the people involved with the wildlife bridge, that they didn't have to do this. No one put a gun to their head. No government agency said you have to have tribal people involved with this project, and they reached out to the tribal community. I'm a consultant. Uh, I've talked to dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of tribal people about that project. It's just an example of people with a good heart wanting to do good work, and that's just one example of some of the great things that's going to happen in 2025. So my wife and I were going to do a book on P22, the mountain lion, that is the poster child for protecting wildlife in California.
Very cool. And folks can also visit your website,
Yes.
mynativestories.com, if they want to learn more about you or hopefully book you for some high paying events,
Yeah.
but really appreciate your time today, Alan, Mr. Salazar. Thank you for being on Political Payne. And, I hope this story, we can help get this story out there and have people discussing it. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, allowing me to share a little bit of what I know and share some of the concerns of tribal people throughout all of America here. So thank you very much, Joe. Have a good day. Happy New Year.
You too. Thank you, sir. Yeah, Happy New Year. And we'll see everybody next time. Like and subscribe and all that. And go find Alan online as well. So
Yes.
thanks.